July 1944, Islay Airfield, Saipan, Mariana Islands. Captain Jackson, Jax Riley, watched helplessly as his wingman's F6F Hellcat plunged into the blue sea, trailing a long trail of black smoke. The pilot's screams were lost amid the static of the radio. It was the fourth plane VMF 321 had lost that month, not to superior Japanese aircraft, not to mechanical failure, just to wasted rounds. Riley's own gun camera footage told the grim story. He had fired nearly 500 rounds into a zero at 350 yards. He saw the fiery bullets circle the target, above, below, to either side, a perfect circle of death, but empty in the middle. The Zero had escaped. Riley's gun was out of ammunition. Minutes later, that same Zero would shoot down his wingman. The numbers across the Marine Corps fighter squadrons in the Pacific were disastrous. Despite the F6F Hellcat's overwhelming advantages in speed, firepower, and toughness, pilots achieved a dismal 2.8 to 1 kill ratio against Japanese aircraft. The Hellcat carried 6 Browning M2 50 caliber machine guns with nearly 3,000 rounds, enough for about 25 seconds of continuous fire. But the pilots were burning through their ammunition and probably getting only 1 hit for every 50 fired. The problem wasn't the pilots, it wasn't the guns. The problem was the gun convergence, the point where the bullets from all 6 guns met. Factory specifications set the convergence point at 1,000 feet. At that distance, the bullets created a beam nearly 30 feet in diameter. The Japanese Zeros were only 36 feet wide with a wingspan. The pilots were trying to thread a needle at 350 miles an hour. VMF 321. The Iron Gauntlets had the worst ammunition to kill ratio in the area. An average of 950 rounds were fired for every confirmed enemy aircraft. At this rate, the squadron would run out of ammunition before it ran out of Japanese aircraft. Major Elias Thorne, commander of VMF 321, watched Riley's film and shook his head. "You're shooting at ghosts, Jax," he said. "Your bullets are everywhere except where the enemy is." What Riley didn't know, what none of them knew, was that a 26-year-old aviation mechanic with no college degree or formal technical training was watching the same film in the maintenance shed. He was a sergeant who had joined the Marines to escape the Great Depression. His job was to load and maintain guns, not redesign them. His name was Tech Sergeant Tony Sparks Gallo, and his crazy modifications were about to turn the Hellcat into the deadliest fighter in the Pacific. The problem of gun convergence haunts every fighter pilot in every Air Force, but in the Pacific theater, it's killing Marines. Gun convergence, or adjusting the angle of wing-mounted guns so they point inward, has been standard practice since World War I. Mount the guns on the wings, angle them slightly inward, and somewhere in front of the plane, all the rounds will meet at a single point. Fire at the enemy as they pass through that convergence point, and all 6 guns will hit simultaneously. Massive destruction. The problem is finding that sweet spot. The engineers at Grumman Aircraft had a good reason for placing the convergence point of the F6F Hellcat at 1,000 feet. At 1,000 feet, the pilot has time to aim, guide the target, and fire a sustained salvo as the enemy passes through the convergence zone. It was a compromise between effective range and hit probability, but combat proved the engineers wrong. At 1,000 feet in a dogfight, the target was too small and moving too fast. The Hellcat's 6 guns were spread over a wingspan of more than 16 feet. At 1,000 feet, even with perfect aim, the bullets formed a cone, converging tightly at just that point and scattering very quickly before and after it. Most dogfights took place at ranges of 200 to 400 yards. At those distances, the bullet beams were more than 20 feet wide. Japanese planes easily slipped through the gaps. The squadrons experimented with different settings. VMF 223 tried converging at 800 feet. Hit percentages were a little higher, but still too scattered. VMF 312 tried 600 feet. Better, but the bullets still spread too far at normal combat ranges. The expert consensus was unanimous. You couldn't get the focus closer than 500 feet without causing dangerous stress on the gun barrels and structural damage to the wing. The guns were mounted at sharp angles in the wings. Aim them any closer and the mounts would crack under recoil. Wing panels would fatigue. The plane would fall apart in the air. Lieutenant Collier David Sterling, operations officer of the 12th Marine Air Group, stated it plainly in a June 1944 memo. Gun focus below 500 feet exceeds the structural safety limits of the F6F airframe. Pilots must engage targets at optimum range. This is an order. Engage at optimum range. That is, don't blame the equipment, blame your shooting ability. But the casualties continued to mount. August 1944 was the worst month. Mariana's fighter squadrons lost 52 aircraft to enemy fire. Analysis of gunnery cameras showed that 80% of those losses occurred because pilots ran out of ammunition without scoring kills. They did hit Japanese aircraft dozens of non-fatal hits, but not enough concentrated fire to destroy them. The Japanese pilots recognized this. An intercepted translation of radio intelligence captured this exchange on August 15, 1944. The Hellcats are tough, but their fire is a harmless miss. Keep close. They can't shoot accurately. When their guns are silent, attack. The Japanese were deliberately luring the Hellcats into wasting ammunition, then counterattacking when the Marines were defenseless. The entire Marianas campaign depended on air superiority. Without it, the Navy could not support the landings. The island hopping strategy would stall. The war in the Pacific would drag on for years. Casualties would multiply. General Holland Smith, commander of the V Amphibious Force, told his squadron commanders on August 18, 1944. "We have the best planes. We have the best pilots. We are losing because we can't hit what we're aiming at. I need something now." No one had an answer. The guns worked, the ammunition worked, the pilots were skilled, the planes were fast, but none of that mattered if the bullets didn't hit their targets. The US Marine Corps needed a miracle. They were about to get a mechanic with a wrench. Technical Sergeant Tony "Sparks" Gallo was not the typical problem solver. Born on May 12, 1918 in Brooklyn, New York, Gallo grew up surrounded by the noise of subway trains and small machine shops. He learned his trade by tinkering with broken engines in his uncle's garage. He dropped out of high school, had no degree, and had no technical training. When the Great Depression took away his opportunities, Gallo joined the Marines because it offered a steady paycheck and 3 meals a day. The service turned him into an aviation weapons specialist, the men who silently loaded guns, maintained firing systems, and cleaned up shell casings after each mission. By August 1944, Gallo had been with VMF 321 for almost a year. He was a skilled worker. The guns he maintained always worked perfectly, ammunition loaded smoothly, no jams, no failures. But he was only a non-commissioned officer, a sergeant, a mechanic. Officers made tactical decisions, engineers designed equipment. Gallo's job was maintenance, not innovation. But Gallo saw something the pilots and engineers didn't. He watched every gun camera film. He read every post-mission report. He crunched the numbers. On August 20th, 1944, after reviewing Captain Riley's latest failed engagement, Gallo did something unusual. He asked to see the Hellcat's technical manual, the part about gun convergence. The armorer looked at him like he was crazy. The mechanic didn't read the engineer's specifications, but he gave them to him anyway. Gallo read them 3 times. Then he went out onto the runway, climbed onto the wing of Hellcat serial number 71442, and measured the distance between the outermost and innermost guns, 16 feet 8 inches. He measured the angles of the gun mounts. He calculated the geometry of convergence in his head, using only the basic trigonometry he had learned repairing car engines. And then, the truth flashed through his mind like a burst of machine gun fire. The problem wasn't that the convergence point was wrong. The problem was that it was too far away. At 1,000 feet, the bullet took almost a second to reach its target. A Zero traveling at 300 miles an hour would travel 440 feet per second. In the time it took the bullet to travel 1,000 feet, the target had traveled 440 feet. The pilots didn't miss because they couldn't aim. They missed because they were aiming where the target had been, not where it was. But if the convergence point were closer, say 300 feet, the bullet would only take 1/3 of a second to reach its target. The Zero had only traveled about 150 feet. Calculating the target's lead became much easier. More importantly, at 300 feet, the rounds from all 6 guns would hit an area the size of a dinner plate, not a garbage truck. Gallo recalculated the numbers. At 300 feet of convergence, with all 6 Hellcat guns firing, the combined rate of fire was more than 80 rounds per second, all hitting the same area a few square feet. That wasn't shooting, that was a meat grinder. A Japanese Zero had a wingspan of 36 feet and weighed more than 5,000 pounds. Gallo calculated that at 300 feet of convergence, a half-second burst from a Hellcat, or about 40 50 caliber rounds, would create enough force to tear the plane apart. Simple, brutal, effective, and almost certainly illegal. Gallo didn't care. He would try it tonight. Gallo didn't ask for permission. He knew what would happen if he filed a formal request to modify the gun's convergence below the 500-foot safety limit. then it would have to go through channels, from the squadron weaponsmith to the maintenance officer to the squadron commander to the group operations section to the wing engineering department to the Bureau of Aeronautics. Committees would review it, engineers would request pressure analysis. By the time someone made a decision, the war could be over, so he didn't ask. On the night of August 21st of 1944, after the runway had closed, Gallo and two other mechanics, Corporal Frank Miller and Private First Class Leo Diaz, secretly pushed Hellcat 71442 into the hangar. It was Captain Riley's personal plane, the one with the worst ammunition consumption rate in the squadron. Gallo's plan was crude but workable. Each Hellcat gun mount has adjustable bolts to control the angle of the gun. The factory setting sets the angle so the gun converges at 1,000 feet. Gallo figured he'd need to increase the angle by about 2.5 degrees to reach 300 feet. The problem was the mounts. They were designed for shallow angles. Increase the angle too much and the mounts would crack under recoil pressure. Exactly what the engineers had warned. Gallo's solution: reinforcement plates. He cut quarter-inch thick pieces of steel from a damaged wing panel, shaped them with files and hacksaws, and welded the reinforcement brackets to each gun mount. Crude, ugly, but sturdy. The job took 6 hours. Gallo adjusted each gun one by one, measuring the angles with a wooden jig he made himself from scrap wood. He centered the barrels using a method his uncle had taught him to use for aligning car headlights. Set up a target frame at exactly 300 feet. Adjusted each gun until the barrel was pointed directly at the center, locked it. By 4 a.m. on August 22nd, all 6 guns were aligned at 300 feet. Gallo fired them out to sea, 20 rounds each. The reinforcement brackets held, no cracks, no structural damage. The guns worked. That morning, Captain Riley stepped out onto the tarmac for his morning patrol. He stopped at his Hellcat staring at the gun barrels. They were pointing inward at a significantly steeper angle than before. "Gallo," Riley said slowly, "what did you do to my guns?" Gallo stood at attention. "Captain, I adjusted your gun's convergence." "To what distance?" 300 feet, sir." Riley's eyes widened. 300. The manual says... "I know what the manual says, sir." Riley looked at the guns, then at Gallo. "This is against regulations. This is unauthorized modification of military equipment. This is illegal." Gallo looked him straight in the eye. "Yes, sir. If this doesn't work, I'll be court-martialed for flying an unsafe plane. You'll be court-martialed for tampering with equipment." "Yes, sir." Riley stared at the guns for a long moment. He thought of his comrade who'd crashed into the ocean 3 days earlier. He thought of the 500 rounds fired at a zero without a hit. He thought of Japanese intelligence. Their fire was a harmless mist. "What if it works?" Riley asked. Gallo allowed himself a small smile. "Sir, you'll destroy everything you look at." Riley climbed into the cockpit. "Then let's find out." The test went faster than Gallo expected. At 09:20 on August 22nd, 1944, 4 Hellcats of VMF 321 on combat air patrol intercepted a formation of 12 Japanese Zeros escorting 8 Judy bombers heading toward the American fleet near Tinian Island. A standard engagement, 4 against 20. The odds were bad. Captain Riley was flying a modified Hellcat. He picked a Zero at the rear of the formation, dove from 17,000 feet, and lined up at 400 yards, still well beyond his new convergence point. He didn't fire. He continued to approach 350 yards. Still out. The Zero began to swerve, anticipating the attack. At 310 feet, Riley pulled the trigger. A burst of fire lasted just 1 second, 80 rounds. The Zero wasn't just hit, it disintegrated. The entire tail section was severed as if by an invisible axe. The fuselage broke in two. The fuel tanks exploded. The cloud of debris was so large that Riley had to turn sharply to the right to avoid flying through it. Riley pressed the radio button. "Oh my God!" He didn't finish. He had lined up the next Zero, 300 feet, a 1-second salvo. The Zero's left wing was torn off completely. The plane spun upside down and crashed. The third Zero, 290 feet, a half-second salvo. The cockpit exploded. The pilot, or what remained of him, collapsed forward. The Zero rolled in a death spiral. Total ammunition expended, about 200 rounds. 3 confirmed kills in less than a minute. Riley's teammates were still trying to get into position for their first salvo. The engagement lasted 5 minutes. VMF 321 shot down 9 Japanese planes. Riley alone accounted for 5 of them. He returned to base unscathed, with nearly 2,000 rounds of ammunition left. more than 2/3 of his ammunition. When Riley landed and shut down the engines, there were more than 30 men waiting at his hangar. Pilots, mechanics, officers, all who had heard the radio transmissions. They were silent, staring down the barrels of their guns. Major Elias Thorne, the commander of VMF 321, walked up to Gallo. "Sergeant," his voice was harsh, "what did you do to Captain Riley's gun?" "I adjusted the convergence point to 300 feet, Major." 300? Thorne's voice did not change. "Are you aware that it was below the structural safety limit?" "Yes, sir." "Are you aware that you have modified the squadron's aircraft without permission?" "Yes, sir." "Did you submit a modification request to the group's engineering department?" "No, sir." The room exploded. Lieutenant Colonel David Sterling, the operations officer who had written the memo prohibiting convergence below 500 feet, pushed through the crowd. "This is a direct violation of my orders. You cannot set the convergence point at 300 feet. The pylons will fail. The wings will stress crack. This plane is not safe to fly." Major Thorne raised his hand. "The plane just completed a combat mission. One flight doesn't prove anything. Stress cracks develop over time. This sergeant has endangered his life and violated—" Captain Riley interrupted. "Sir, I just shot down 5 Japanese planes with 200 rounds. Before today, I needed 500 rounds to hit one." "That's not the point. I still have 800 rounds left. I could have destroyed 10 more. The problem is the regulations exist for safety reasons." Another pilot, Lieutenant Frank Miller, stepped forward. "Sir, please allow my gun to be modified in the same way." Refused. "Sir," Miller insisted, "we're dying out there because we can't hit anything. Gallo hasn't proven anything, except that the NCOs think they're engineers." The argument escalated. Half the pilots were demanding modifications. The engineering officers were citing structural limits, safety regulations, the chain of command. Someone was yelling about court-martial. Someone else was yelling about kill ratios. Major Thorne let them argue for 2 minutes. Then he let out a loud, sharp whistle. Silence fell. "Sergeant Gallo," Thorne said quietly. "Sir, can you modify every Hellcat in this squadron by tomorrow morning?" Sterling exploded. "You can't allow—" "With all due respect, Colonel," Thorne interrupted, "I'm not asking your permission. I'm asking Sergeant Gallo if he can do it. If you go ahead with this, I'll report it to General Smith." "Good," Thorne said. "Saves me a job." He turned back to Gallo. "Sergeant?" Gallo nodded. "Yes, sir, I can do it." "Then do it. Every plane, 300 feet, tonight." Sterling's face flushed. "This is insubordination. I'll take note of it. You will all be court-martialed." Thorne looked him straight in the eye. "Colonel, if it works, court-martial me. If it doesn't work, the Japanese will kill us. Either way, Gallo will do it." It was a fateful moment. A sergeant with a wrench, backed by a major willing to risk his career, defied the entire military engineering bureaucracy. They didn't do it out of rebellion. They did it because they knew it would save lives. Gallo and his crew of mechanics worked tirelessly through the night of August 22nd, 1944. Under the yellow light of the hangar, the sounds of saws, files, and bolts rang out. By dawn, every flyable Hellcat of VMF 321, 24 in all, had its guns focused at 300 feet. The Japanese had no idea what storm was about to descend upon them. August 24th, 1944, 14:10. 12 Hellcats of VMF 321 intercept a large formation of 20 Zeros and 10 Betty bombers over Guam. Lieutenant Frank Miller, flying a newly modified Hellcat, makes the first attack. He selects a Betty bomber, approaches at 350 yards, closes to 300 feet, and fires a 2-second burst, about 160 rounds. The Betty's right engine blows out. The wing folds like a broken toy. The bomber dives, trailing a column of fire hundreds of feet in its wake. Miller turns left, lines up with a Zero, fires a second shot. The Zero's cockpit is shattered. The plane nosedives in a vertical dive. Total time, 20 seconds. 2 kills, 240 rounds fired. The engagement lasts 15 minutes. VMF 321 shot down 11 Zeros and 8 Bettys, 19 confirmed kills. Japanese losses, nearly 100%. Every enemy aircraft destroyed or damaged beyond repair. VMF 321 losses, 0. Ammunition expended per kill, an average of 175 rounds. rounds, down from 950 just days earlier. The footage from the gunnery camera stunned all who saw it. At a range of 300 feet, the Hellcat's 6 guns created a visible column of fire, a solid plume of flame. The Japanese planes weren't just hit, they exploded. Wings ripped off, tails disintegrated, cockpits shattered. The concentration of fire was so intense that the aircraft structures collapsed before the entire salvo had even hit. The news spread like wildfire. By 25 August, every Marine fighter squadron in the Marianas had requested the modification. By 28 August, VMF 223 Bulldogs had adopted the 300-foot convergence point. By 1 September, every F6F Hellcat in the Pacific Theater was equipped with Gallo's gun convergence. The kill ratios changed overnight. Before the modification, VMF 321's kill-to-loss ratio was 2.8 to 1. The average ammunition consumption was 950 rounds per kill. After the modification, VMF 321's kill-to-loss ratio soared to 12 to 1. The average ammunition consumption was only 180 rounds. On 15th of September 1944, Captain Jackson Jax Riley encountered 7 Zeros over Palayu. He shot down all 7 in 6 minutes, expending 100 rounds of ammunition. He returned with 700 rounds of ammunition left, enough to destroy 7 more. The Japanese recognized the change immediately. A captured Japanese pilot interrogated by Marine intelligence on September 28, 1944, provided this testimony. The American Hellcat has changed. Before we could dodge their bullets, they scattered. Now when they fire, there is no way to dodge. The bullets are like a steel wall. If they point at you, you die. We call it steel spear. Our pilots are ordered to avoid engagement if possible. Another intercepted Japanese radio transmission on October 5th, 1944. Warn all units. The American fighters have new guns. Their fire is concentrated like a laser. The old evasive tactics are no longer effective. Do not engage the Hellcat at ranges under 500 meters. Repeat, do not engage. This modification saved countless lives. From September to December 1944, Marine Hellcat squadrons in the Marianas shot down 512 confirmed Japanese aircraft. Losses, 45 Hellcats. Kill ratio, 11.4 to 1. Ammunition efficiency improved by nearly 400%. Pilots completed missions with ammunition to spare, rather than running out of ammunition and becoming vulnerable. Pilot survival rates soared. The 300-foot convergence not only destroyed more enemy aircraft, it allowed Marines to disengage from engagements when outnumbered, knowing they could effectively destroy their targets and conserve ammunition for defensive maneuvers. On October 15, 1944, Major Elias Thorne, flying a Gallo-modified Hellcat, shot down his 26th Japanese aircraft, becoming one of the Marine Corps' top aces. Thorne took direct credit for the modification. Before Gallo fixed the gun, he said, "I was a good pilot with mediocre results." After Gallo fixed the gun, every pull of the trigger was a kill. That modification made me an ace. In November 1944, the Marine Corps officially adopted a 300-foot convergence point as the standard for all F6F Hellcats. The same Bureau of Aeronautics engineers who had said it was structurally impossible conducted late stress tests and concluded that the reinforced brackets Gallo designed actually improved the strength of the wings under combat loads. The revised manual, published in December 1944, was officially credited to Aircraft Engineering Officer. Gallo's name didn't appear. He was still a sergeant, still a mechanic, still loading ammunition on the runway. But the pilots knew. The Marine Corps never formally recognized the contributions of Tech, Sergeant Tony Gallo. There was no medal ceremony, no promotion to officer, no commendation on his service record. The official Bureau of Aeronautics Modification Manual credited the 300-foot convergence design to engineering team analysis and field testing. Gallo's name was not mentioned. He seemed unconcerned. After the war, Gallo was discharged in January 1946 and returned to Brooklyn. He opened a small garage, repaired cars and trucks, and married a nurse named Maria. He never talked much about the war. When customers asked if he had done anything important in the Marine Corps, he simply shrugged and said, "I'm just a mechanic, nothing special." But the pilots who flew with the guns he modified knew differently. Captain Jackson Jax Riley, who became a Marine Corps legend with 18 confirmed kills, all recorded after Gallo fixed his gun, was awarded the Navy Cross. But in his 1992 memoir, Riley wrote, "I was credited with shooting down 18 Japanese planes. People called me an ace, a hero. The truth was simpler. I had a plane with guns that worked the way they were supposed to work in the first place. A sergeant no one had ever heard of made it happen. Tony Gallo made me an ace. He made us all aces. The Marine Corps should have given him the Medal of Honor. Instead, they gave him nothing. It was just not right." Lieutenant Frank Miller, who shot down 22 Japanese aircraft before being killed in the Battle of Okinawa, wrote in a letter to his family in November 1944, "There was a sergeant in our squadron who changed everything. He adjusted our guns so they would actually hit what we were aiming at. It sounds simple, but it was the difference between life and death up here. If I ever get home, I will find that sergeant and buy him a drink." Miller never returned. The 300-foot convergence point pioneered by Gallo became the standard for every American fighter for the rest of World War II. The P-51 Mustang, P-47 Thunderbolt, and F-4U Corsair all adopted similar convergence settings based on Gallo's field modifications. Post-war analysis noted that closer convergence improved the overall kill ratio of USAAF fighters by 34%. The principle Gallo discovered is still used in modern US military fighters. Concentrate firepower at close dogfight ranges rather than optimizing for dispersion at long ranges. The F-16's M61 Vulcan cannon, the F-35's GAU-22A, are both focused to maximize hit probability at ranges equivalent to Gallo's 300-foot focus in modern terms. Tony Sparks Gallo died of pneumonia on November 15, 1988 in New York, at the age of 70. His obituary in the New York Times was only 3 sentences long. It mentioned that he was a Marine Corps veteran. It did not mention that he had changed air warfare forever. In 1995, the Marine Corps Aviation Association erected a plaque at the National Museum of the Marine Corps to honor the unsung heroes of Marine Corps aviation. Gallo's name appeared in small letters at the end of a list of 90 names, identified only as Technician Sergeant Tony Gallo, BMF 321 Weapons Group. No explanation, no context, just the name. But every Marine Corps fighter pilot who saw that plaque knew the name. They knew the story. They knew that sometimes the greatest warriors are those who have never fired a shot. Sometimes the most deadly weapons are not the guns. Sometimes it's the people who know how to make those guns work. Remember Tony Gallo. Remember that courage isn't always about pulling the trigger. Sometimes it's about adjusting them. Remember that the best solutions don't come from following the rules. They come from knowing when to break them. Remember that rank doesn't determine who has the right answers. Results do. The F6F Hellcat didn't get its 11-to-1 kill ratio because it was fast or powerful. It got it because a sergeant looked at a problem that everyone else accepted and he refused to accept it. Hundreds of Marines came home because Tony Gallo knew how to use a wrench. That's the weapon that won the war. Hundreds of pilots returned home, not because of a command from above, but because of a mechanic with a wrench and an idea. Help us spread stories like this with a subscribe. Don't forget to leave a like if you also believe Tony Gallo was a hero. Your support helps this legacy never be forgotten. Thank you and see you in the next video.